My son called me coach at Christmas dinner, and I hadn't heard that word from him in 15 years. He said it the way he used to when he was 11 and I was running his Little League practices out at Riverside Park when I was the person he looked to before every pitch to see if he was doing it right. He said it in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely, passing the roles, not even looking up. His girlfriend, they'd been together 8 months, was sitting right next to him laughing at something my wife had just said. She didn't notice. I noticed. My name is Gil Parrish. I'm 53 years old. I spent 22 years with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, working financial fraud cases out of the Cincinnati field office, before I took early retirement after a back injury that made sitting at a desk for 10 hours straight no longer something my body would allow. After that, I spent 6 years doing private compliance consulting for regional credit unions, helping them build internal audit processes for detecting suspicious activity before it became someone else's problem. I have sat across from people who built elaborate fictions around other people's retirement accounts. People who took inheritances and college savings and the proceeds from the sale of family farms and turned them into nothing. I know how those people move through a room. I know how they make you feel seen. His name was Tanner Groff. My son, whose name is Will, had been dating him since April. He was 31 years old to Will's 28. He worked, he said, as an independent wealth management consultant, which is a real job description, and also a description that requires exactly 0 licensing to use. He had kind eyes and a firm handshake, and he remembered that I took my coffee with 1 sugar and that my wife Helen had mentioned she was thinking about going back to get her master's degree. He asked about it during dessert with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. By every surface measurement, he was exactly what you would hope for. And then Will said, "Coach," and I remembered everything I know about the kinds of people who are very easy to like. After dinner, Helen suggested Tana help her carry the dessert plates to the kitchen. She had been married to me for 26 years. She had watched me work enough cases from home that she knew when something had shifted behind my eyes. She moved him out of the room without breaking the rhythm of the conversation. Will sat across from me at the dining room table, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "When did it start?" I asked him. He looked at me. "When did what start?" "However long you've been sitting on something." He let out a slow breath. Set the mug down. "About a month, maybe 6 weeks." "Tell me." He rubbed the side of his jaw. "About 2 months into the relationship," he said, Tana had started bringing up money in what felt like a natural way. General conversation, nothing alarming. How most people in their late 20s were already behind on building real wealth. How the traditional financial system was designed to keep regular people in low-yield products that benefited the institutions more than the account holders. Will had listened and hadn't thought much of it. Tana didn't push. He was good at not pushing. Then, about 6 weeks ago, Tanner had mentioned that he worked with a small circle of investors who had access to a private fund structure. A former colleague of his managed it out of Nashville. Commercial real estate backed, consistent annual returns, not flashy, but above anything you'd get from a conventional broker. He said he personally had put $40,000 into it 2 years ago. He said the annual return had been close to 17% both years. He mentioned it the way you mention a good restaurant, casually, once. Then he mentioned it again 3 weeks later, in the context of talking about Will's job change. Will had left a stable position at a logistics company 6 months ago to take a lower-paying role at a non-profit he cared about. The pay cut was real. He'd mentioned it to Tanner early in the relationship, the way you mention things to people you're getting close to, the way you trust them with the parts of your life that feel vulnerable. The fund was called Veritas Growth Partners, Tanner said. Based out of Nashville, operating in Tennessee and Kentucky. Open to outside investors twice a year by referral only. The current intake window was closing in 18 days. The minimum was $25,000. There was a preferred allocation tier, significantly higher projected returns, for investors committing over $60,000. Will had about $64,000 in savings, most of it from 3 years of careful living after paying off his student loans. He had told Tanner about it in October, sitting in a car outside a movie theater, talking about the future, the way you do when something feels like it might be real. "Did he send you anything in writing?" I asked. "Last week, an offering memorandum." Will picked up his phone and slid it across the table to me. I haven't responded yet. I told him I needed time to think it over. Good. I didn't pick up the phone yet. Has he mentioned the 64,000 specifically? Will was quiet for a moment. He knows, I said. It wasn't a question. I told him, Will said. In October, I didn't think about it as information, it was just talking. I know. I was just talking to him. I was just talking to him. I know, Will. The kitchen was quiet in the way that means people are listening without appearing to. I could hear Helen and Tana talking about something, cabinet doors, the sound of water running. Tana laughed at something. He had a good laugh, warm and unhurried. I picked up the phone and opened the email. The offering memorandum for Veritas Growth Partners was 11 pages. Clean layout, a Nashville address on Commerce Street, a professionally designed logo in navy and gold. The performance history showed consistent annual returns between 15 and 19% over a 5-year period, with no auditing firm listed as a source. There was a section describing something called the Veritas Capital Protection Reserve, which was presented in the kind of language that sounds like a guarantee but contains no actual legal mechanism for enforcement. The minimum was 25,000. The preferred allocation tier began at 60,000. That number, 60,000. Just under what Will had. There was a deadline, 18 days. I need to take this with me, I said. Will nodded. And, Will. I waited until he looked at me. You did the right thing tonight. He didn't say anything. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked back up at me and something in his face went very young. For just a second, the way it used to after a bad inning when he was 12 and needed to know it was going to be okay. I didn't say it was going to be okay. I didn't know yet. But I held his gaze until the young thing in his face settled back down into the 28-year-old man he was. That was enough. After they left, Helen stood at the kitchen sink for a while without saying anything. She ran water over a dish she'd already rinsed. He seemed perfectly genuine, she said finally. He probably is, in most ways. That's not the issue. How bad is it? I told her about the 18-day window. The 60,000 threshold. The offering memo with no audited financials, no listed general partners, no verifiable third-party anything. She dried her hands and turned around and looked at me the way she does when she wants me to be wrong and already knows I'm not. Okay, she said. What do we need to do? I was at my desk until 1:30 in the morning. I started with the SEC's EDGAR database, which is public, free, and took less than 5 minutes. No registered entity under the name Veritas Growth Partners. Not in Tennessee. Not anywhere. I checked FINRA's broker check for Tanner Groff. No registered broker. No registered investment advisor. No registration of any kind. I searched the Tennessee Secretary of State's business registry. Veritas Growth Partners LLC had been filed 14 months ago. One listed principal, not Tanner Groff. The Commerce Street address in Nashville mapped to a shared office suite provider, the kind that gives you a professional-sounding street address, a suite number, a mail slot, and a phone number that routes to voicemail, for around $80 a month. I looked at the performance chart again. 5 years of consistent 16 to 19% annual returns with no auditor, no source, no third-party verification of any kind. A legitimate private fundraising capital from outside investors under Regulation D would have Form D filings with the SEC. It would have audited financials. It would list its principals. There was none of that here. There was a logo and clean serif fonts and a deadline. I ran Tanner Groff's name. He existed. A LinkedIn profile with moderate connections. Listed as an independent financial consultant based in Louisville, Kentucky. Previous employer listed as a regional investment advisory firm in Lexington. The Lexington firm was real. I knew how to find out the rest. I called a former colleague of mine named Art Belsky at 7 the next morning. Art had spent 14 years with IRS criminal investigation before moving to the SEC's Office of Investor Education and Advocacy in Washington. We had worked overlapping cases twice in the late 2000s. He was precise and owed me nothing, and he picked up before the second ring finished. I gave him Tanner Groff's name, the Lexington firm. Veritas Growth Partners, the Nashville address. Give me a few hours, he said. While I waited, I called a woman named Renata. She's not her real name, she prefers it that way, who had worked as a forensic accountant on contract to the FBI's financial fraud unit out of Columbus for 9 years before going fully independent. I had worked with her on 3 cases during my time at CID. She was the best reader of financial documents I had encountered in 22 years of doing this kind of work. I read her the relevant sections of the Veritas offering memorandum over the phone. The Capital Protection Reserve section, the description of the fund's underlying real estate positions, the investor rights language. She stopped me partway through the reserve section and asked me to reread the last 2 sentences. That's a named thing with no definition, she said. The reserve is described as a separate fund, but there's no disclosure of its capitalization, its governance, its custodian, or its legal structure. It is a sentence about a thing that does not necessarily exist. If an investor lost money and tried to claim against this reserve, there is no mechanism here, none, that would compel the fund to produce anything. It's protective language that protects no one. It's there because it sounds like something. That's what I thought. Gil, how close is he to handing over money? 18 days. I don't know where he is emotionally. He came to me before he committed to anything. A pause. That's the good news. Art called me back at 11:40. Tanner Groff is real, he said, which meant the other news was coming. 31 years old, grew up outside of Bowling Green. The Lexington firm was real. He had worked there for 27 months and left after a client complaint was filed and partially investigated. The client was a woman, 67 years old, recently retired from a hospital administrative position. She had moved $52,000 into an unregistered private fund at Tanner's recommendation. After he told her it was how his own family had built generational wealth, the fund had no registration in Kentucky or any other state. She lost the money. She did not pursue legal action. Why not? I asked. Her daughter talked her out of it. The daughter was embarrassed for her. Said it would be too public. I sat with that for a moment. Veritas Growth Partners, I said. Is it real? The LLC is real. It was filed by a man in Clarksville, Tennessee, who has a prior civil judgment against him for a failed investment vehicle in 2019. He and Groff appear to have a prior association. They attended the same financial services conference in Nashville in 2021. We cannot establish a formal partnership yet. Groff is insulated. His name is not on the documents. Intentional structure. Without question. He recruits. Someone else holds the paper. How many victims can you establish? A pause that meant he was deciding how much to tell me. Confirmed losses tied to Tanner Groff across 3 states, 6 people. Totals somewhere around 380,000. But Gil. He paused again. That's what we can document. This has been going on for at least 3 years. We believe there are more who haven't come forward. I thanked him and sat at my desk for a while after I hung up. 6 people. $380,000. A 67-year-old woman in Lexington who had spent her career in healthcare administration and came away from her retirement savings with nothing, and was too ashamed to say so out loud. And now my son's savings noted and filed away, sitting behind an 18-day window, and a man who had remembered Helen's coffee order without being asked. I drove to Will's apartment that afternoon. He met me at the door in jeans and a sweatshirt, the particular flat-eyed look of someone who slept badly and knows why. We sat at his kitchen table. I told him everything, the EDGAR search, the FINRA check, the Commerce Street address, and what it actually was, Renata's analysis of the reserve language, the woman in Lexington, the 6 confirmed victims, the fact that Tanner Groff's name was nowhere on the Veritas LLC documents, which was not an accident. It was architecture, a structure built to create distance between the recruiter and the fraud. Will was very still through all of it. He told me he saw a future with me, he said. Not angry, not yet, just the voice of someone reading something back to themselves that no longer means what it used to. I know. He said it 2 weeks ago, on the couch. Just said it, I know. He looked out the window at the apartment complex parking lot. January light, flat and grey. I almost said yes to him last weekend. He brought it up again on Saturday, said the window was getting short. I had the number basically ready in my head. 60,000. I was going to tell him yes, and then he stopped. I just didn't. I don't know why I didn't. You knew something was wrong. I didn't know anything. It felt too. I don't know. Something felt off, and I decided I was just being paranoid because of how things ended with Kevin. Kevin had been Will's boyfriend before Tanner. That ended badly, for reasons unrelated to money, and left Will with a wariness he'd been trying to reason himself out of for the past year. I thought I was letting an old wound ruin something good. You used the signal, I said. He looked at me. Coach, I said. At dinner. That was the signal. He was quiet. I didn't plan it. I know. I was sitting there and I needed you to look at me the way you did when I was a kid and something wasn't right. He stopped. Pressed his lips together. I haven't called you that since Little League. I heard it. He took a long breath and let it out. What do I do now? I explained it, the way I used to explain a plan to someone who was capable and steady and needed to know exactly what was being asked of them. He needed to meet with Tanner one more time. He needed to let him make the complete pitch, the fund structure, the projected returns, the wire instructions, the specific account information, the deadline language. He needed to record the conversation. In Kentucky, where Will lived, recording a conversation you are a party to is legal without disclosure. His phone, his voice, his own conversation. He needed to be a person who had thought it over and was almost ready. Can you do that? I asked. He looked at me the way he did when he was 12, and I handed him the ball in a tied game and told him I believed in him. He thinks he knows what I am right now, Will said. He thinks I'm someone who's a little gun-shy, a little hungry for something solid, and just needs the last little push. He paused. I can be that for one more afternoon. He texted Tanner that evening and said he'd been doing a lot of thinking and had a few last questions before he made a decision. He kept the tone warm, slightly eager, the way Tanner would expect. Tanner responded in under 10 minutes. Relaxed, encouraging. He suggested they meet Saturday at the coffee place on Bardstown Road where they'd gone on their third date. Somewhere familiar. Somewhere Will felt comfortable. He actually used that phrase. Somewhere you feel comfortable, always managing the emotional weather. Saturday morning I sat with Will at his kitchen table, and we went through it one more time. Phone in the breast pocket of his jacket. Voice memo running before he walked through the door. Let Tanner lead. Don't rush the financial specifics. Ask clarifying questions from a position of genuine interest. So walk me through the wire process again. And how soon would I start seeing returns? If there's silence, let it sit. People who are selling things fill silence. Don't be too eager, I told him. But be close. Be a person who has already decided and just needs to say it out loud. I know what that looks like, he said. I almost was that person last week. I drove home. Helen and I sat in the living room and did not watch the football game that was on. She made tea. We waited. Will texted me at 2:58. Done. I have everything. Calling you now. His voice on the phone was steady, but I could hear underneath it the particular quality of someone whose adrenaline is finishing its work. He had sat across a table from Tanner Groff for just under 2 hours and held himself completely still. Tanner had been thorough. He had laid out the entire structure of Veritas Growth Partners, projected returns between 17 and 22% annually, the intake deadline, the preferred allocation tier and exactly where Will's 60,000 would fall within it, the wire transfer instructions, a specific account number at a credit union in Tennessee. He explained that the fund operated outside traditional banking infrastructure. He called it processing efficiency, and that invested capital would be deployed within 60 hours of receipt. 60 hours. I knew what that meant. 60 hours was more than enough time to move money through enough layers that recovery became nearly impossible. That wasn't a feature. That was a disappearing act with a schedule. He held Will's hand across the table when he said goodbye. Will told me. He said he was genuinely proud of Will for taking a step, for trusting his future to something real. I didn't say anything for a moment. You did exactly right, I said. I called Art that evening and told him we had the recording. He gave me a secure channel to send the audio file through, and Will transferred it within the hour. Art said he'd review it overnight. He called me the next morning at 6:45. It's enough, he said. We're coordinating with the Louisville office and the Tennessee AG's financial fraud unit. A pause. Ray Gill. There's more than I told you. The Tennessee credit union account has had significant inflow over the past 11 months. We're looking at confirmed losses close to $540,000 across 9 victims. And we believe there are others we haven't identified yet. $540,000. People who saved carefully and were lonely and wanted something good after a hard time. People who didn't have someone at their table who would spend 2 decades learning to recognize exactly this kind of architecture. Tanner Groff was arrested at his apartment in the Highlands neighborhood of Louisville on a Thursday morning. Will texted me at 8:33 from the hospital where he volunteers on weekday mornings, one hand pressed over his mouth, standing in a parking lot in the cold. It's happening right now, Dad. Art just confirmed. I texted back, go inside. Get some water. You did this. The investigation that followed established that Tanner Groff had been running variations of the same structure for at least 4 years across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana. Veritas Growth Partners was not his first vehicle. A prior fund, operating under a different name, had been quietly dissolved 18 months before Veritas was formed. The man whose name appeared as principal on the Veritas LLC had a prior civil fraud judgment and had been recruited by Tanner specifically to serve as the document layer, the name on the paper, the legal buffer, the person between the pitch and the liability. Across all confirmed victims, 9 people, total losses exceeded $560,000. Will was the only person Tanner had targeted who had not lost $1. 6 weeks later, he came for Sunday dinner. Just the 3 of us. Helen made her pot roast, the one that takes most of the day and turns the whole house into the smell of Sunday afternoon. We sat at the same table where 8 months of careful, patient work had almost paid off for someone who had learned to be very good at being light. Will was different that evening. Quieter than usual, but not in the way he'd been quiet in December, that loaded hell-breath quiet. This was something else. Settled. Like a window that's been stuck and finally moves. He helped clear the dishes. He sat back down with his coffee and didn't say anything for a while, and that was fine. I keep going back to October, he finally said. The car outside the movie theater? He nodded. I told him the number. 64,000. I said it like I was telling him the color of my car, something that didn't need to be protected. He looked at the mug in his hands. He filed it. Yes, he was already building backward from that number. The 60,000 threshold, the preferred allocation, all of it was already built around what I had. That's how it works. He didn't choose you randomly. He chose you because of where you were. The job change, the pay cut, the thing with Kevin, a person who was working hard and wanted something to feel like it was moving in the right direction. Will was quiet. That doesn't make you naive, I said. It makes you someone who is open to something. That's not a character flaw. That's what they're looking for. These people aren't opportunists. They're patient. They find a window, a job change, a divorce, a loss, a transition, and they build something real inside it. The attention is real. The time is real. The feeling of being known is real. The fraud lives underneath all of that, out of sight. Until someone outside the situation looks at the structure and names what they see, it still doesn't feel good. It shouldn't. It would be strange if it did. But here is what I need you to hold on to. I waited until he looked up at me. The moment your instinct said something was wrong, you listened to it. You didn't shut it down all the way. You reached back for something, for me. And you used whatever you had. A word. A name you hadn't used since you were 11 years old. That's not nothing, Will. Most people don't do that. Most people feel exactly what you felt and talk themselves out of it. And while they're talking themselves out of it, the deadline arrives, and the wire goes through, and the number is gone. That is the actual common ending of this kind of story. He looked at the table. 9 people, he said. Yes. Some of them lost most of what they had, I said, and some of them are still too embarrassed to acknowledge it happened. And because of the recording you made, those 9 people have a real shot at some form of accountability and some form of recoverity. The evidence is clear. It names the fund, the account, the amounts, the timeline, in his own words. That's because of you, Will. You sat across from him for 2 hours and held yourself completely together. You did that. He didn't say anything for a long time after that. Helen came back from somewhere in the house, and we moved to the living room and put something on television that none of us really watched. The evening went soft, the way good Sunday evenings do. At some point, Will fell asleep in the armchair with his socks still on. Helen covered him with the blanket from the couch. I sat in the quiet and thought about the 22 years I spent trying to understand people who treat other people as numbers in a structure. There is something I want to say plainly. Financial fraud of the kind Tanner Groff practiced does not work on foolish people. It works on people who are open, people who are in a period of transition and want to believe that something good is coming. The most effective financial predators are not opportunists acting on impulse. They are patient. They identify a window, a job change, a breakup, a death, a retirement, and they build something genuine inside that window. Real warmth. Real attention. The feeling of being seen and chosen. By the time the financial conversation arrives, the target is already inside a relationship that doesn't feel like a trap. Because in the ways that matter most, it isn't. The time was real. The laughter was real. The laughter was real. The hand across the table was real. The fraud was underneath all of it. Quiet. Waiting. There are specific things to look for. Any investment promising consistent returns well above 8 or 9% annually from a private source should prompt serious questions. Any fund that cannot be verified through the SEC's EDGAR database or FINRA's broker check, both of which are free and take less than 5 minutes, is a fund you should not give money to. Any business address that turns out to be a commercial mail service is not an office. Any artificial deadline, a closing window, a limited allocation, an opportunity that expires at the end of the month, is a pressure mechanism, not a feature of a legitimate investment. Any document that describes an investor protection mechanism without defining its capitalization, its custodian, or its legal enforcement pathway is describing something that may not exist. FINRA Broker Check is at brokercheck.finra.org. The SEC's investor tools are at investor.gov. They are public. They are free. They take minutes. Please use them before you move any amount of money into any private investment vehicle, regardless of who is asking. And this: if someone in your life reaches out to you in a quiet, imperfect way, with a look, with an old word, with a name they haven't used since they were a child, sitting in the grass at a little league field, watching you wave them in from third base, please listen. Will didn't have a speech ready. He didn't have a plan. Something in him knew before his conscious mind was ready to say it that he needed someone outside the situation to look at what was happening. That knowing. That instinct. That willingness to reach for someone even in a small and sideways way. That was the thing that made everything else possible. Protect that in the people you love. We didn't lose anything. We came close, and the difference, at the end of all of it, was a 28-year-old man at a Christmas dinner table saying a word he hadn't used in 15 years because he trusted that the person across from him would hear it and understand what it meant. If something in you is speaking right now, it is not wrong. It is not paranoia. It is not the residue of old wounds making you see things that aren't there. Your instincts were built for exactly this. The only question is whether you will give yourself permission to listen to them. I keep thinking about the woman in Lexington, 67 years old, spent her career in a hospital doing careful, unglamorous work, saving the way people save when they know nobody is going to hand them anything. And then she trusted the wrong person at exactly the right moment, right after retirement, when she was finally supposed to be okay, and she lost $52,000 and was too ashamed to say so out loud. Her daughter talked her out of pressing charges, not because it wasn't real, because shame is heavy, and Tanner Groff knew exactly how to make it heavier. That's the part I sit with longest. What happened in this story wasn't luck. It wasn't because my family is smarter than hers, or more suspicious, or more careful. It was because Will made one choice that most people in his position don't make. When something in him said something is wrong, he didn't argue himself out of it. He reached for someone. He used whatever he had, a word, a name, 11 letters he hadn't spoken in 15 years, and he trusted that I would hear it. That's a moral act, not a dramatic one, not heroic in any visible way. It's the quiet kind of integrity that most people don't recognize as integrity at all. The willingness to say, I don't want to be wrong about this person, but I'm not willing to pretend I don't feel what I feel. That is what honesty looks like when it's hardest. Not confession, not confrontation. Just not lying to yourself when it costs you something to stop. And then there's what Will did on Saturday, sitting across a table from someone who had spent 8 months building something carefully designed to look like love. He held himself completely still for 2 hours. He asked the right questions in the right tone. He let Tanner lead. He didn't flinch when Tanner held his hand at the end and said he was proud of him. That takes something, not just nerve, but clarity. The ability to understand a situation accurately, to see the structure of it, and to act from that understanding rather than from how you wish things were. That's what I spent 22 years trying to build in myself, and my son did it on 48 hours of preparation at 28 years old. The woman in Lexington didn't have that. Not because she was less capable. Because she was alone in the situation. Because she had no one on the outside looking at the structure, naming what they saw, handing her a plan and saying, you can do this. What protects people isn't suspicion. It isn't cynicism or the refusal to let anyone in. It's the combination of those 3 things working together. The honesty to trust what you feel, the understanding to know what you're actually looking at, and the steadiness to act on both of those things even when it's hard, even when you care about the person sitting across from you. Even when part of you still wants to be wrong. Will had all 3 that week. The woman in Lexington deserved all 3. The 9 people whose names I never learned deserved them too. I don't know how to fix the distance between those 2 outcomes, but I know it starts with saying the thing out loud. Whatever small, imperfect, sideways version of it you have. A word, a question, a name from 15 years ago. Start there. The rest is possible from there.